As the hours of the white night crept onward, the tranquility of Lake Bodom deepened. The forest stood in solemn silence, its thick canopy of birch and pine seeming to hold its breath. The peninsula where the teenagers had pitched their tent was shrouded in stillness, save for the occasional murmur of the lake and the faint rustling of leaves. The campsite, nestled among the trees, appeared untouched by the world beyond. Inside the tent, the four friends lay huddled in their sleeping bags, their laughter and lively chatter from earlier now replaced by the soft, even rhythm of sleep. The warmth of their shared space, the comforting closeness of friendship, had lulled them into a peaceful slumber. For a while, the night unfolded as expected, with nothing but the quiet embrace of the wilderness around them. But as the hours slipped by, the forest seemed to change. Its calm began to feel heavier, its silence deeper. The gentle sounds of the natural world receded, leaving an oppressive stillness that hung over the campsite like a shroud. The trees, their towering forms motionless in the pale light, seemed to loom closer, their shadows lengthening in unnatural shapes. And with Dionysus stirred first, her sleep restless and shallow. A faint sound had reached her, a rustling, faint but distinct, somewhere outside the tent. It was not the soft movements of the wind through the trees or the distant call of an animal. The sound was different, deliberate, and close. Her senses, still dulled by sleep, struggled to make sense of it. She lay still, her eyes half open in the dim light filtering through the canvas. Her breath slowed as she strained to hear. For a moment, there was nothing, only the quiet hum of the lake in the distance. Then it came again, a soft but unmistakable disturbance in the underbrush just beyond their shelter. Emmy with Dionysus's heart quickened as she sat up, careful not to disturb the others. The tent felt suffocating, its confines too small and too fragile against the unknown outside. Her gaze darted to the open flap of the tent, where the pale glow of the white night spilled inside, illuminating little more than shadows. She peered out, her movements cautious and hesitant. First she saw nothing. The forest appeared as it always had, a dense wall of trees and tangled undergrowth. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, a shape emerged, a dark figure standing motionless just beyond the edge of the tent. Its form was indistinct, blending into the shadows, but there was no mistaking its presence. It stood unnaturally still, as though it were watching, waiting. The figure shifted slightly, and in that moment, Emma with Dionysus caught a glimpse of something that froze her in place. Its eyes glowed, two pinpoints of red light that pierced through the gloom. They burned with an intensity that seemed to bore into her, sending a wave of fear coursing through her body. She felt her breath hitch, her chest tightening as she struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. Before she could react, the figure moved. Its sudden motion was swift and purposeful, and in an instant, it was upon the tent. The light from outside vanished as the figure loomed over the entrance, blocking out the pale glow of the night. The fragile canvas walls trembled under its weight as it pressed down on the structure, trapping the teens inside. The quiet of the forest shattered as chaos erupted. The tent collapsed, its supports giving way under the sudden force. The once cozy shelter became a suffocating prison, its fabric pressing down on the teenagers as they scrambled in confusion and panic. Muffled sounds filled the air, thuds, the tearing of fabric, the muted cries of pain. The struggle inside the tent was desperate, but it was brief. The assailants' attack was unrelenting, brutal, and methodical. The weight of the assault was overwhelming, leaving no time for escape or defense. The forest, once a haven of calm, now seemed to close in around them, its stillness a cruel backdrop to the horror unfolding within. As quickly as it had begun, the attack ended. The forest fell silent once more, its oppressive quiet returning as though nothing had happened. The collapsed tent lay still, its inhabitants motionless beneath its folds. The pale light of the white night crept over the scene, its soft glow illuminating the aftermath of the violence. The forest, timeless and indifferent, resumed its watch over the lake. The calm of the white night persisted, a cruel contrast to the events that had transpired. On the peninsula, the once lively campsite now stood, as a solemn reminder of the fragility of human life against the vast and unyielding wilderness. The group's excitement carried them through the wooded trail leading toward their campsite. With the glow of the lake's white night reflecting through the canopy above, the teenagers felt an invigorating sense of freedom. The secluded wilderness amplified their anticipation for the days ahead, offering the kind of tranquility they rarely experienced. Yet, the earlier encounter with the hostile woman at the kiosk lingered faintly in the back of Emma with Dyrus's mind, casting a shadow on her otherwise buoyant mood. When they reached their chosen campsite, they parked their motorcycles against the trees and began unpacking their supplies. The location they had selected was a small peninsula that extended into the lake, providing a stunning view of the water from all angles. The thick forest surrounding the area added an extra layer of seclusion, making it feel like they had the entire lake to themselves. The isolation, however, also accentuated the eerie quietness of the surroundings. Elwith Dyrus found herself glancing occasionally at the dense tree line, a feeling of unease settling in her chest despite the cheerful chatter of her friends. The boys set up their tent quickly, stringing the canvas between two sturdy birch trees. They worked with practiced ease, arranging the modest shelter to provide just enough room for the four of them to sleep comfortably. The girls helped organize the rest of the campsite, laying out blankets and ensuring their belongings were safely stashed in a corner of the tent. It was a simple setup, but it felt like a home away from home, surrounded by the calming sounds of rustling leaves and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. As they finished preparing their camp, the earlier tension began to fade. The group gathered around, sharing drinks and stories as the light dimmed ever so slightly. The white night cast an ethereal glow over the landscape, and the teenagers basked in the surreal beauty of their surroundings. The lake's still surface reflected the golden hues of the sky, creating a picture-perfect backdrop for their celebration. The boys joked and laughed, their voices carrying into the stillness, while the girls enjoyed the comforting warmth of each other's company. After a while, they decided to explore the water. The lake, so pristine and inviting, seemed impossible to resist. They waded in slowly, the cool water a refreshing contrast to the mild summer air. Laughter erupted as they splashed around, the tension of their earlier encounter at the kiosk melting away. The serene beauty of the lake and their shared joy anchored them in the moment, and for a time, the forest's quiet seemed less ominous. The dock nearby became their resting place as the group dried off and continued their celebration. They sprawled out, staring at the never-darkening sky above. The atmosphere was lighthearted, filled with a youthful energy that made the earlier unease seem like a distant memory. For Emmy with Dyrus, the night felt like a dream, a perfect union of nature's splendor and the closeness of her dearest friends. As the evening wore on, the group returned to their campsite. They dried off and changed into dry clothes, preparing for a restful night in their cozy tent. They settled into their sleeping bags, their bodies tired from the day's activities, and their spirits high from the shared camaraderie. The soft hum of the forest enveloped them, its rhythmic sounds serving as a lullaby as they drifted off to sleep. Yet, as Emma with Dyrus lay in the tent, staring at the faint light filtering through the canvas, she couldn't entirely shake the strange sensation that had been gnawing at her since their stop at the kiosk. The woman's hostility had felt personal, almost targeted. Emma with Dyrus tried to rationalize it, reminding herself of the beauty around her and the joy she felt with her friends. Still, the silence of the forest seemed to grow heavier as the night deepened, pressing against the fragile walls of the tent. The forest outside was an expanse of shadow and stillness, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant call of a bird. In this secluded pocket of wilderness, it was as though they had stepped outside the boundaries of the world they knew. While the others slept soundly, Emma with Dyrus's thoughts lingered on the quiet unease that had followed them since they left the kiosk. Something about this place felt different, but she couldn't quite place why. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she succumbed to sleep, her mind finally quieting as she joined her friends in rest. Outside, the forest stood silent and watchful, the lake a mirror of the night sky. The white night cast its glow over the peninsula, where four teenagers lay unaware of what the coming hours would bring. In the early summer of 1960, the dense forests and tranquil waters of Finland's Lake Bodom promised an idyllic escape for four teenagers seeking adventure and celebration. The lake, cradled by tall birch and pine trees, reflected the calm sky above. Its serene beauty and remote location made it an appealing destination for those longing to disconnect from the bustle of city life. For 15-year-old Emma with Dionysus Bierkland, it was the perfect setting for an intimate celebration of her upcoming 16th birthday. Accompanying her were her boyfriend, Nils Gustafsson, who was 18, and their closest friends, Seppo Bauman and his girlfriend, Anja Maki. The four were inseparable and eager to enjoy a few days of laughter and freedom. The group planned to camp on a peninsula that jutted into the lake, a secluded spot offering breathtaking views and a sense of privacy. The teens had meticulously prepared for the trip, packing their motorcycles with essential supplies, including a canvas tent, food, drinks, and warm clothes for the chilly nights. Their excitement was palpable as they left their homes in Espoo, a city south of the lake, and began the 18-mile journey into the Finnish countryside. The lake's beauty greeted them as they arrived that afternoon. The dense forest canopy filtered sunlight onto the winding trails, creating dappled patterns on the ground as their motorcycles hummed to a stop. The waters glistened under the soft daylight, and the gentle rustling of leaves provided a soundtrack to their adventure. Emma with Dionysus, who adored nature, felt her heart swell at the sight of the pristine landscape. This was her ideal way to mark the occasion, surrounded by friends and enveloped by the untouched wilderness. After parking their motorcycles and stretching their legs, the group made their way toward a small wooden snack kiosk situated near the water's edge. This would be their last stop before heading to their campsite. The kiosk, though simple in design, appeared functional. Behind it stood a modest house, presumably belonging to the kiosk's owner. It was a quiet day at the lake, with few other visitors in sight. As they approached the kiosk, the teens were met with an unexpected and unsettling hostility. The woman running the stand, her back turned to them, showed no interest in assisting them. When Emma with Dionysus politely called out to request some drinks, the woman turned abruptly, her face twisted with anger. Her response was curt, bordering on aggressive. The teens were taken aback by her demeanor, a stark contrast to the serene environment around them. While the boys found the encounter amusing and exchanged nervous laughs, Emma with Dionysus felt an unshakable discomfort. The woman's hostility seemed deeply personal, even though they were strangers to her. After reluctantly serving them their drinks and snacks, she offered a cryptic warning. She advised them to set up their tent as far away as possible from her property. The command, delivered with a scowl, was chilling. The woman's final outburst, as the teens walked away, mentioned her frustrations with unruly campers in the area, adding an ominous layer to her already unsettling behavior. Leaving the kiosk, the group dismissed the encounter as an oddity, attributing the woman's behavior to eccentricity or stress. The laughter and carefree attitudes of Seppo and Nils lifted the mood as they climbed onto their motorcycles and resumed their journey. Emma with Dionysus tried to shake off her unease, focusing instead on the excitement of reaching the campsite. They drove deeper into the forest, following a narrow path flanked by towering trees and dense underbrush. The further they ventured, the more isolated they became, with the sounds of civilization fading into the distance. Their chosen campsite lay on a small, wooded peninsula that extended into the lake, offering a perfect balance of seclusion and scenic beauty. Upon arrival, the teens wasted no time setting up their camp. They strung their canvas tent between two sturdy birch trees, ensuring it was secure and comfortable. With their makeshift home established, the group settled into the rhythm of their retreat. The daylight lingered as they unpacked, a phenomenon known in Finland as the white night. When the summer sun dips below the horizon but does not fully set, the sky adopted a warm, hazy glow, casting the lake in golden light. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine. As the friends relaxed and shared drinks, their laughter echoing through the trees. For Emma with Dionysus, the setting was magical, a snapshot of youthful freedom. She was surrounded by people she cared about, with Nils by her side. His leather jacket and confident demeanor gave him an air of maturity she admired. The couple's budding romance added a layer of sweetness to the adventure, making the day feel all the more special. The promise of uninterrupted time with their friends, away from the responsibilities of daily life, filled Emmy with Dionysus with joy. The group's excitement for the trip overshadowed any lingering concerns from their earlier encounter. They were far removed from the world of others, enveloped by the natural beauty of the lake and forest. As the sun hovered low in the sky, they knew the night would bring more stories, laughter, and the kind of memories that last a lifetime. The Lake Bodom murders have cemented themselves as one of Finland's most infamous and enduring mysteries. The peaceful, forested lake where 4 teenagers once camped for a joyous birthday celebration is now a place imbued with a haunting aura. Over the decades, the story has grown far beyond the initial investigation, evolving into a tapestry of folklore, cultural intrigue, and unresolved speculation. The idyllic setting of Lake Bodom, once a haven for nature lovers and campers, became a macabre landmark. Visitors are drawn to the site, not for its natural beauty, but to stand in the shadow of a tragedy that has captured imaginations across the world. The allure of the lake lies not just in its serene waters but in the chilling questions that linger in its air. The story of the 4 teenagers, their lives violently cut short, continues to resonate with those who visit, creating a strange juxtaposition between the calm of nature and the terror of what transpired. The case has spawned a proliferation of theories, each attempting to unravel the mystery of that fateful night. From the plausible to the bizarre, these interpretations of the murders often reflect the cultural fears and fascinations of the time. Some view the case through the lens of human psychology, examining motives, suspects, and circumstantial evidence. Others take a more fantastical approach, weaving tales of curses, supernatural beings, or rituals into the narrative. The enduring mystery has made Lake Bodom a symbol of the unknown, a place where the boundaries between fact and fiction blur. The story has inspired countless retellings in popular culture. Books, documentaries, podcasts, and even films have sought to capture the essence of the murders, each with its interpretation of what might have happened. Some focus on the human tragedy, exploring the lives of the victims and the devastating impact on their families. Others delve into the dark intrigue of the suspects, piecing together timelines and motives to construct plausible scenarios. These retellings have only served to deepen public fascination, ensuring that the case remains in the collective consciousness long after the events themselves have faded from living memory. The fascination with the Lake Bodom murders is not limited to Finland. The story has reached an international audience, drawing comparisons to other unsolved cases and earning a place among the world's most chilling true crime mysteries. Its universal themes of youth, innocence, violence, and the inexplicable strike a chord across cultures. The details of the case, so vivid, so horrifying, lend themselves to the kind of storytelling that lingers in the mind long after the telling is done. For the families of the victims, the legacy of the Lake Bodom murders is one of heartbreak and unanswered questions. The tragedy shattered their lives, leaving them to grapple not only with their loss, but also with the relentless public scrutiny that followed. The endless theories and speculations, while captivating to outsiders, have been a source of pain for those who knew and loved the victims. The lack of resolution has denied them the closure they so desperately need, forcing them to live with a wound that time cannot heal. Nils Gustafsson, the sole survivor, carries his own burden. Though he was acquitted of any wrongdoing, the suspicion and scrutiny he endured left lasting scars. His memories of that night remain fragmented, haunted by the image of the shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. Whether this recollection was a hallucination, a fragment of trauma, or a glimpse of something truly inexplicable, it has become an indelible part of the story. His survival, while miraculous, has placed him at the center of a mystery that he cannot fully explain, a reluctant figure in a narrative that continues to unfold. Lake Bodom itself has become more than a location. It is a character in the story, its waters and forests a silent witness to the violence that occurred. The natural beauty of the area contrasts sharply with its dark reputation, creating an unsettling duality. The lake, with its shimmering surface and tranquil surroundings, seems almost to conceal the weight of its history, holding its secrets just out of reach. Despite the decades that have passed, the case remains open in the hearts and minds of those who ponder its mysteries. Each new theory, each new examination of the evidence, feels like an attempt to bring light to the shadows that shroud the story. Yet, the truth remains elusive, slipping through the fingers of those who seek it. The legacy of the Lake Bodom murders is a testament to the enduring power of the unknown. It is a story that continues to captivate, to haunt, and to remind us of the fragility of life and the impenetrable nature of some mysteries. The lake, its forests, and the memory of that night stand as a silent monument to the unanswered questions and the lives forever lost in its shadows. As the decades stretched on, the Lake Bodom murders settled into the realm of Finland's most enduring mysteries. The official investigation had long grown cold, yet whispers of suspicion, theory, and intrigue continued to ripple through the public consciousness. Over the years, new information occasionally emerged, often reigniting interest in the case. But each lead seemed only to deepen the shadowy enigma that had settled over the lake. Among the many theories that persisted, the spotlight occasionally returned to Nils Gustafsson, the sole survivor of the attack. Despite his acquittal in 2004, questions lingered about his involvement. The prosecutors in his trial had presented a theory that framed him as a jealous boyfriend driven to an act of uncontrollable rage. They argued that his injuries, though severe, could have been self-inflicted to divert suspicion. The blood evidence on his shoes, combined with testimony of an argument overheard near the campsite on the night of the murders, formed the backbone of their case. Yet, the jury had found this narrative unconvincing. Nils's account of seeing a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes during the attack remained a chilling detail that resisted easy categorization. While skeptics dismissed it as a fabrication or a trauma-induced hallucination, others found it too bizarre to ignore entirely. To this day, his recollection remains one of the most haunting fragments of the case, a detail that feels more like the stuff of folklore than a concrete clue. For others, the local recluse, Carl Valdemar Gillström, remained the most likely suspect. Carl's reputation for aggression toward campers was well known in the community. His history of bizarre and threatening behavior, coupled with his proximity to the campsite, made him a natural focus for suspicion. However, his wife's insistence on his innocence had effectively shielded him from deeper scrutiny during the original investigation. Years later, Carl's reported confession to a neighbor added a sinister weight to the suspicions surrounding him. The neighbor claimed that Carl had admitted to the murders while drinking one evening, stating outright that he was the murderer of Bodom. His subsequent death by drowning in the lake only fueled speculation. To some, it seemed an act of guilt and remorse, a final acknowledgement of his role in the tragedy. To others, it raised more questions, as the circumstances of his death were never conclusively determined. Whether it was suicide, an accident, or even foul play remained an open question, further obscuring the truth. Another unresolved thread of the case centered on Hans Assmann, the enigmatic figure who had checked into a hospital the morning after the murders. His appearance, disheveled, with dirt under his nails and stains on his clothes, fit the profile of someone who had been in the woods. Despite his seemingly airtight alibi, doubts lingered about his involvement. Over the years, rumors swirled that Assmann had connections to intelligence agencies or other secretive organizations, which led some to believe he may have been involved in the murders as part of a larger, more complex plot. These theories, while captivating, lacked evidence and ultimately remained in the realm of speculation. The lack of definitive answers created fertile ground for more outlandish theories. Some pointed to supernatural elements, invoking the description of the glowing red eyes seen by Nils. Others suggested the involvement of a shadowy cult or secretive group, using the remote forest as a stage for their dark rituals. These ideas, though intriguing, lacked any foundation in evidence, yet they found an audience among those drawn to the eerie and the unexplained. As time passed, the Lake Bodom murders became a symbol of unanswered questions and the limits of human understanding. The once idyllic lake became a site of macabre curiosity, drawing visitors who sought to stand where the tragedy had occurred. True crime enthusiasts dissected the evidence, building and deconstructing theories in online forums and documentaries. The enduring mystery transformed the case into a cultural phenomenon, its details debated and analyzed by generations. For the families of the victims, the lack of resolution was a cruel weight that time could not diminish. The tragedy of losing their children in such a violent and senseless manner was compounded by the absence of justice. The lingering doubt and speculation, the constant reopening of wounds through public fascination, made the grieving process an unending ordeal. The Lake Bodom murders remain an enduring testament to the fragility of life and the darkness that can emerge from the most unsuspecting corners. The serene waters of the lake, once a place of celebration and escape, now carry the weight of a history marked by blood and mystery. Though the answers remain elusive, the story of that fateful night continues to captivate and haunt, a reminder of the thin line between beauty and horror in the natural world. The aftermath of the Lake Bodom murders plunged the local authorities into one of the most perplexing investigations in Finnish history. From the moment they arrived at the scene, the police were confronted with contradictions and clues that seemed to defy logic. While the brutality of the crime was undeniable, its motive and execution were shrouded in mystery. What had started as a peaceful getaway for 4 teenagers had ended in an incomprehensible tragedy, leaving investigators struggling to piece together the events of that horrific night. The crime scene itself was chaotic yet strangely calculated. The tent, once a symbol of safety and camaraderie, lay collapsed and torn. Its fabric was soaked with blood, its structure crumpled beneath the weight of violence. The 3 bodies inside and around the tent showed signs of a ferocious attack. Seppo and Anya had been killed in their sleeping bags, unable to escape the onslaught. Anna, with diuresis, though she had managed to crawl out of the tent, bore injuries that spoke of a desperate struggle for survival. The sheer number of stab wounds and the intensity of the blunt force trauma suggested an attacker driven by uncontrollable rage. Yet, certain details of the crime scene didn't fit with the savagery of the attack. Items of value, such as wallets and watches, were missing, hinting at a potential robbery. However, the motorcycles belonging to the boys remained parked against the trees, untouched but stripped of their keys. It was an odd choice for a thief to take the keys but leave the vehicles behind. Even more puzzling was the absence of Nils's leather jacket and shoes. These items, sentimental but not inherently valuable, were difficult to place in a coherent narrative of the crime. The discovery of Nils's blood-speckled shoes beneath a pile of leaves some 500 meters away added to the confusion. Forensic analysis revealed that the blood on the shoes belonged to the other victims, but none of it matched Nils's own. This suggested that the shoes had been worn during the murders and then deliberately discarded. Yet Nils, who had survived the attack, was found barefoot and severely injured. The logical explanation eluded the investigators, who were left wondering whether the shoes pointed to the killer's actions or were part of a more elaborate ploy. Nils, the sole survivor of the massacre, became a key figure in the investigation. His injuries were extensive. His face was unrecognizable from the fractures, and his body bore the marks of significant trauma. It took days for him to regain consciousness and weeks before he was able to speak coherently. When he finally provided a statement, his recollection was fragmentary and vague. He could not recall the events leading up to the attack or the attack itself in detail. However, one haunting memory stood out. During the chaos, he remembered seeing a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes outside the tent. It was a chilling detail, but one that offered little in the way of concrete leads. As the investigation progressed, the police expanded their efforts beyond the immediate area of the campsite. The forest was combed extensively, with the military called in to aid in the search for clues. Despite their efforts, no murder weapon was ever found, and the surrounding wilderness yielded no additional evidence to clarify the crime. Witness accounts from the lake on the morning of the discovery provided only faint glimmers of insight. The 2 boys who had seen the blonde-haired man running from the direction of the campsite offered descriptions, leading to a composite sketch that was widely distributed. However, the image was generic, resembling many men in the region, and led to a flood of tips that proved largely unhelpful. The most promising lead came from a hospital located 13 miles from the lake. On the morning after the murders, A man named Hans Assmann had checked in, claiming to suffer from severe stomach pain. His disheveled appearance and erratic behavior immediately drew attention. Covered in dirt and with red stains on his clothing, Hans refused to explain the origin of his condition. Adding to the suspicion, he bore a striking resemblance to the composite sketch of the blond man seen running near the campsite. However, when questioned, Hans provided an alibi that placed him miles away from the lake at the time of the murders. His alibi was corroborated by multiple witnesses, leaving investigators unable to connect him definitively to the crime. Frustration mounted as the case stalled. Over the following weeks, the police interviewed hundreds of people, chasing down leads across Finland, but each trail seemed to go cold. Speculation ran rampant among the public, with theories ranging from random acts of violence to targeted killings. The brutality of the murders and the lack of resolution left a profound mark on the community, turning Lake Bodom into a place synonymous with fear and tragedy. Despite the lack of progress, the police refused to close the case. Every new tip, no matter how minor, was pursued with vigor. However, as months turned to years, the trail grew colder, and the investigation lost momentum. The murders, once the subject of national headlines and relentless scrutiny, began to fade from public consciousness. The idyllic beauty of Lake Bodom became tainted by the mystery it harbored, its still waters and dense forests hiding secrets that would remain unsolved for decades to come. The morning sun cast a pale light over the forests surrounding Lake Bodom. The mist clung to the ground, curling around the bases of trees and settling on the surface of the still water. The lake, typically lively with visitors, was eerily quiet. The occasional call of a bird broke the silence, but the usual hum of activity was absent. The wilderness seemed to hold its breath, as though reluctant to reveal the horrors that had transpired during the night. At around 6 in the morning, 2 young boys made their way to the lake's edge to fish. They were drawn to the tranquility of the water, the calm surface reflecting the sky above. Their chosen spot offered a clear view of the peninsula where the 4 teenagers had camped. They cast their lines into the water, their minds focused on the quiet pursuit of their pastime. As they fished, their attention was drawn to a figure emerging from the forest near the campsite. It was a young man with blonde hair, running at an unsteady pace away from the area. His disheveled appearance and hurried movements seemed out of place in the serene setting. The boys watched him for a moment, curious but unalarmed, before returning their focus to the water. The significance of what they had witnessed would not occur to them until much later. The morning progressed, and more visitors began arriving at the lake. Families with picnic baskets and swimmers seeking a refreshing dip ventured to the shoreline, oblivious to what lay hidden in the dense forest. Among these visitors was a father accompanied by his 2 young sons. They had come to enjoy the peaceful waters of the lake and explore the wooded trails surrounding it. As the trio walked along the path leading to the peninsula, the father noticed something unusual in the distance. Between the trees, where the campsite should have been, there was an irregular shape on the ground. It appeared to be a crumpled heap of canvas, its edges tangled and uneven. At first, he assumed it was the remains of an abandoned tent, perhaps left behind by careless campers. Curiosity propelled him forward, his children trailing behind. As he drew closer, the reality of the scene became horrifyingly clear. The collapsed tent was not merely an abandoned shelter. It was surrounded by forms that were unmistakably human. The father's breath caught in his throat as he realized that these were not sleeping campers but bodies, motionless and bloodied. The sight was grotesque, a stark violation of the natural beauty of the setting. Instinctively, the father turned to shield his sons from the gruesome discovery. He ordered them to leave immediately, his voice trembling with urgency. The 3 retreated down the path, the father clutching his children's hands tightly as they hurried away. Once they reached safety, he found a phone and contacted the authorities, his voice steady despite the shock coursing through him. When the police arrived, they made their way cautiously to the campsite. The scene that awaited them was unlike anything they had encountered before. The tent lay crumpled and torn, its once sturdy canvas now a battered shroud over the bodies of 3 of the teenagers. The surrounding ground was littered with signs of struggle. Deep gouges in the dirt, fragments of fabric, and scattered belongings. The air seemed heavy, laden with the violence that had unfolded there. Two of the teenagers, Seppo and Anya, had not made it out of the tent. Their bodies bore the marks of a frenzied attack, with deep wounds inflicted through the collapsed fabric. Emma with diuresis, however, had managed to escape the confines of the tent but had not made it far. Her lifeless form lay atop the tent, her body bearing signs of both blunt force trauma and multiple stab wounds. It was evident that she had fought desperately for her life before succumbing to the attack. The fourth teenager, Nils, lay nearby. Unlike the others, he was not dead. His face was swollen and unrecognizable, his injuries severe, but he clung to life. When an officer approached him, expecting to confirm his death, Nils's eyes fluttered open. His faint, labored breathing was the only indication of his survival. The officer immediately called for medical assistance, and Nils was rushed to a nearby hospital. As the authorities began their investigation, the inexplicability of the scene grew more apparent. Several items were missing, including wallets and watches, suggesting a robbery. However, other stolen items, such as the keys to the boys' motorcycles, seemed nonsensical. The motorcycles themselves were left behind, untouched, adding to the confusion. Nils's leather jacket and shoes were also missing, their absence noted with particular interest by the investigators. The forest surrounding the peninsula stood as a silent witness, its dense foliage holding secrets it refused to divulge. As search teams scoured the area, they discovered a pair of blood-speckled shoes hidden beneath a pile of leaves some distance from the campsite. The discovery added another layer of mystery to an already baffling case. By midday, news of the gruesome murders spread, drawing attention from across Finland. The once peaceful lake was now a site of tragedy, its reputation forever marred. The authorities, faced with the enormity of the crime, began piecing together the events of the night, searching for answers in a forest that seemed determined to keep its silence. As the investigation into the Lake Bodom murders stagnated, the public and police alike turned to theories and speculation to fill the growing void left by the lack of concrete answers. The brutal nature of the killings, combined with the eerie setting and puzzling clues, fueled a wave of hypotheses that ranged from plausible to fantastical. Each new lead or piece of information seemed to deepen the mystery, adding layers of complexity rather than providing clarity. The most persistent theory in the immediate aftermath of the murders centered around the idea of a random, opportunistic killer. The isolated campsite, the late hour, and the frenzied violence suggested an attack by someone who stumbled upon the teens and acted impulsively. This line of thinking was bolstered by the sighting of a blonde-haired man running from the direction of the campsite on the morning of the murders. Witnesses described his disheveled appearance and hurried movements, leading investigators to believe he might have been fleeing the scene of the crime. The composite sketch of the man was widely circulated, drawing an overwhelming response from the public. Dozens of tips poured in, with people claiming to recognize the individual in the sketch. However, the broad, generic nature of the image meant it resembled many men in Finland, rendering the leads largely unhelpful. The police pursued each tip diligently, but the promising lead failed to yield a suspect. The man seen running from the forest remained unidentified, his role in the murders, if any, unresolved. Another suspect emerged in the form of Hans Assman, a man who checked into a hospital the morning after the murders. Assman's appearance and behavior raised immediate suspicion. His clothing was stained with what appeared to be blood, and his hands were caked with dirt as though he had been digging. Adding to the intrigue, Assman bore a strong resemblance to the composite sketch of the blonde-haired man. His erratic demeanor and refusal to explain the state of his clothing only deepened the investigators' interest. However, when questioned by police, Assman provided an alibi that placed him miles away from Lake Bodom at the time of the murders. Multiple witnesses corroborated his story, leaving investigators with no choice but to clear him of suspicion. Despite this, Assman remained a figure of intrigue, his connection to the case debated among true crime enthusiasts for years. To some, the alibi seemed too convenient, and the stains on his clothes too coincidental to dismiss entirely. Locals around Lake Bodom pointed fingers at a man closer to home. Carl Valdemar Gilstrom, a 55-year-old who lived near the lake, was well known for his hostility toward campers. Carl's reputation as a belligerent and sometimes violent individual made him a natural suspect in the eyes of those familiar with his behavior. He had a history of lashing out at visitors to the area, cutting down tents, throwing rocks, and even firing a gun at a camper on one occasion. His proximity to the crime scene and his disdain for outsiders seemed to align with the circumstances of the murders. Despite the accusations, Carl's wife, who was also the hostile woman the teens had encountered at the kiosk, provided him with an alibi. She claimed Carl had been home with her and their children on the night of the murders. The police, lacking additional evidence, accepted her statement and dismissed Carl as a suspect. However, rumors persisted, and locals remained unconvinced of his innocence. Years later, Carl reportedly confessed to a neighbor that he was responsible for the murders. The following day, his body was found in the lake, having drowned under unclear circumstances. Whether his death was a result of guilt, suicide, or something more sinister was never determined. As years turned into decades, more theories emerged, many veering into the realm of the bizarre. Some speculated that the teens were victims of a supernatural force, pointing to Nils's recollection of a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. Others proposed that the murders were part of a ritualistic act, committed by an unknown cult operating in the area. While these theories captured the imagination of the public, they lacked any substantiating evidence and were dismissed by authorities as mere conjecture. The lack of resolution also led some to revisit Nils's role in the tragedy. As the sole survivor, his inconsistent memory and the mysterious details surrounding his injuries raised questions. In 2004, decades after the murders, Finnish prosecutors shocked the nation by charging Nils with the crime. They argued that a fight had erupted between Nils and Seppo over emivithdiaresis, leading to a jealous rage that culminated in the murders. The missing items, including Nils's shoes, were cited as evidence of an attempt to stage the scene and misdirect investigators. During his trial, Nils maintained his innocence, repeating his limited recollections of the night and insisting he had no motive or memory of committing the murders. The jury ultimately acquitted him, finding the evidence insufficient to convict. His name was cleared, but the shadow of suspicion lingered in the public consciousness. As the decades wore on, the case of the Lake Bodom murders became a haunting legend. Each theory, no matter how plausible or outlandish, only added to the enigma surrounding the tragedy. The lake, once a place of natural beauty and solitude, became synonymous with unanswered questions and lingering fear. The true events of that night, hidden beneath layers of speculation and mystery, remained as elusive as the dense shadows of the forest itself.